Winning war doesn't mean killing people. Killing innocent people doesn't mean raping.
We do not want to be branded as terrorists.
There are rules to be respected.
The person and rights of other people who are not actually involved in the actual combat must be completely respected at all costs.
The purpose of this film is to learn from the experiences of fighters who have battled against their governments.
It's always good to teach others what you have learned.
They talk frankly about what they did in the line of fire, their knowledge and implementation of the laws of war, and what they think of the work done by the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC.
It took us some time to realize that ICRC was indeed an independent body, impartial of anything.
The ICRC provides humanitarian protection and assistance for victims of war and armed violence. It has a permanent mandate under international law. In addition, the ICRC reminds governments around the world of their obligation to implement and respect international humanitarian law, or IHL, also known as the law of war or the law of armed conflict. These rules are meant to limit excesses during hostilities.
International humanitarian law must be taught on all levels.
It is a key mission of the ICRC to promote the respect of these laws of war among regular armed forces, as well as armed opposition groups. All actors engaged in combat are subject to international humanitarian law and have the responsibility to integrate the laws of war in their doctrine and operations. The ICRC can support them in their efforts.
One ought to insist on the sanctions.
This film shows what these laws mean to experienced fighters in 4 different countries around the world. The first destination is Sudan. This country is the largest state in Africa, almost the size of Western Europe, with a population of around 35 million. Sudan, a former British colony, became independent in 1956. In 1983, a war broke out between the population in the south of the country and the central government in the north. It lasted for more than 20 years. Over 500,000 people were killed, hundreds and thousands were displaced. The SPLA, the former guerrilla movement, signed a peace treaty in January 2005. The fighters have become the soldiers of the new national army. ICRC delegate Juan Martinez and filmmaker Kazan Sherabayani interview members of the Sudan People Liberation Army, the SPLA.
Many countries today are affected by the war around the world. You've chosen Sudan, particularly the south of Sudan, Juba. Why is this?
Because here you have a very interesting example of a guerrilla group born in the early 80s and through the years becoming an important armed group, becoming the government armed forces. So this is quite specific to southern Sudan, and it was interesting for us to have this type of armed group, very structured.
Brigadier Marwal Ayumdor joined the SPLA when he was 19 in 1983. Later, he graduated as an officer and commanded troops into many battles.
Before you go to the battlefield, you are told, when you attack, don't loot, don't kill a prisoner of war, don't kill anybody who has surrendered, and don't kill a wounded. Bring them.
You had orders?
We had orders written form. But some of us were wondering, why do you want me not to kill the enemy? But of course, the laws were very, very, very strong. Either you are escorted or you are child life, so they were very, very strong.
And have you heard of cases of raping women or looting villages in those years?
Yeah, there were.
And what did you do to prevent those situations?
Cases of raping were there, definitely were there. Myself and my command, we squatted about 10 soldiers.
So the SPLA took strong stand
on this issue of raping. An issue of raping, there was a problem. Issue of desertion, we were very, very, very strong. And robbery. So you find where these things happen, they happen when the commander is weak. In 1988, the senior commander was squatted in Bor because of raping and then looting on the population around Juba.
Sergeant Johnson joined at the age of 15 after a massacre in his village. Despite his initial hunger for revenge, he learned to respect the law.
If you break the rule, you are accountable. In a conflict, you cannot do whatever you want.
So does this mean that you are the code of conduct?
Rules are there. They determine how to deal with those captured in combat. We also respect aid agencies that give assistance to people.
Corporal Mary picked up a gun at the age of 15 after witnessing the killing of her father.
Were you full of rage and you needed revenge?
In the beginning, I wanted to kill those who killed my father.
Did that mean that you didn't care about any laws of war?
I was young and didn't know anything about the laws of war. I just wanted to kill those who killed my father.
And did you revenge your father?
No. The army has its order, and it must be respected. I would have killed, but the army stopped me. I had to respect the rules.
Was it difficult for you to accept these rules?
No. I accepted to respect my commander's rules. My commander was like a father to me.
Does that mean if you had a commander who actually did not impose rules on you, you would go and kill?
Yes, I would have killed all the enemies.
Discipline within the SPLA was crucial in order to enforce the respect for the laws of war.
Victory is not killing anything. Victory is taking the objective, okay? We came to Juba. We are now in Juba. We are now the government. But we did not come by killing, you see? We came by talking, okay? So killing is something different. Killing does not mean that you take, that is the objective. The objective of any war is not to kill, okay? But it's to defeat an enemy, even through talking.
Diplomacy is often the only way to end an armed conflict. Another typical example is El Salvador in Latin America. This small country, with a population of 6.7 million, was the scene of a bitter civil war in the 80s.
El Salvador is very representative of what happened in the Latin American continent in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. It was an ideological conflict. It was not an ethnic conflict or a religious conflict. It was 25 years ago. Now it's over, and we know that we can have a contact with the former guerrilla, which is a political party today.
In 1992, the government and the FMLN, the Farabundo Marti Liberation Front, signed a peace agreement. Since then, many former FMLN guerrillas have integrated into the country's democratic political system. Carlos Castaneda, a former fighter, is now a member of parliament, but the memories of his revolutionary past are still very fresh.
He was a former commander. He was wounded in combat and died in April 1986.
On the 8th of May, 1979, the FMLN held a rally against the government. The police shot and wounded several demonstrators outside the main church of San Salvador. The confrontation turned into a civil war. 80,000 people were killed and more than 500,000 were displaced. Today, thousands are still missing. The ICRC was very active in this arena.
Nos encontramos varias veces con el ICRC.
We often met the ICRC in hospitals, in prisons, and during battles. Their role was essential.
And today, with the distance of time, how do you see, let's say, the role of the ICRC during the conflict in El Salvador?
Obviously, with some distance, the conflict becomes relative. What would have happened in a conflict with such enormous dimensions, with fights and wounded people? What would have happened without the National Red Cross and the essential role of the ICRC? Who would have witnessed or noticed?
Nidia Diaz, one of the most important FMLN commanders, benefited directly from ICRC's commitment to protect persons who are arrested and detained in relation with an armed conflict. It is a famous story published in her book, I Was Never Alone.
It's on my people's struggle, on being alone in a cell, and also on the Red Cross. That's why I never felt alone. I was wounded and captured in combat. An American-Cuban caught me. I realized I could not die because I really wanted to die. I was wounded. So I tried to find the means to kill myself, but he prevented me to do it. He put me into the helicopter, pointing a gun at my head. I tried to jump into the void. Later, the helicopter landed at the Air Force Base. I fainted several times lying in the stretcher. Then I shouted one thing only. I am a prisoner of war. I want the Geneva Conventions applied to me. I want to see the ICRC. One day they said the press wanted to see me. Blindfolded, they pulled me out. In the cell were various groups, amongst them the ICRC. And they said, be patient. You are now registered and you can't disappear. You are a prisoner. Be patient. Investigations are ongoing. It's important when the Red Cross is visiting a prisoner, they cannot just take him out of prison. But they can guarantee that his rights are being respected. The Red Cross raised my spirits and brought food. The American Congress applied pressure until I was finally operated in August. The Red Cross helped organize my transfer from the prison to a private clinic.
ICRC successes, like the story of Nidia, are possible only if delegates in the field have free access to all victims of a conflict. That can only happen if all parties accept the presence of the ICRC as an independent, neutral, and completely impartial organization.
Did you trust the delegates of the International Red Cross?
I never distrusted them particularly. How would you guarantee an evacuation without human rights violations? This was organized by the National and the International Red Cross through respected corridors and adequate passages, so the army could not attack the wounded. Possibly, in the beginning, some people might have distrusted these institutions. There was fear they could inform the enemy on locations and organizations of their guerrilla. But whenever I met them, I felt that their humanitarian work was of very high value.
One of the central preoccupations of FMLN was to make sure that the civilian population would not turn their backs against them. Tio Leo, a former fighter, insists on respecting people and their property.
La población fue tratada adecuadamente, que no fue maltratada.
It was important to respect and not mistreat the population.
Porque uno tenía la mayor parte de su vida relacionándose.
We spent most of our time maintaining good relations with the civilians.
Entonces, de eso dependía, ¿no? De que la población creyera en nosotros.
We depended on their belief in us and that we were respecting human rights, their well-being and their property.
Respetuosa de sus bienes naturales, de sus propiedades. Las guerras no se hacen.
Wars are not made to kill the population or to kill for the sake of killing.
The next destination is the Philippines, in Southeast Asia. It covers an area of over 7,000 islands and has a fast-growing population that is already 85 million. In the south, on the island of Mindanao, live the Bangsamoro people, who are a Muslim population. They formed an armed liberation movement. It became openly active in 1972, when President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. Over 100,000 people were killed during 3 decades of clashes with the armed forces of the Philippines. Finally, in 2005, the warring parties agreed to stop fighting. Now they are engaging in peace talks. The municipality of Sultan Kudarat, near Cotabato City, is a stronghold of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, also known as MILF. Mohammed joined the MILF in 1972. Today he is a member of the General Staff and operational commander of the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are now in the peace process between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. We will show to the world, to the IMT, International Monitoring Team, that the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces is civilized armed forces.
After years of fighting, Mohammed insists that the laws of war must be universally respected.
If any of my comrades will violate the international humanitarian law, I am very sorry and I will condemn him, because that is not a way of fighting the government. We respect the international right of every people, every religion.
The MILF leadership draw their inspiration from religious texts, but they also stress that international humanitarian law does not clash with Islam. Sonny Dibao, another member of the MILF General Staff, makes the point.
Islamic laws is complete, but we also need the introduction of this humanitarian laws, because this is also important. Nothing wrong for the MILF to adopt such laws in our country. It's for the good of mankind anyway. And there is no contradiction from our viewpoint. We have to abide by Islam and we have to abide by the international law, by the international humanitarian law, to protect the civilians, to protect the victims of war, to protect the persons. Good things. Before fighting with them, we have also to determine properly whether it is proper for us to conduct an operation against the enemy who are mingling with the civilians. So every time we are trying our very best to always respect the rights and security of every individual within that community. Because we do not want to violate international human law and what is also provided for in the Holy Quran and the legal ways of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Whenever international humanitarian law is ignored, the consequences are devastating. One example is Congo, Brazzaville, a country the size of Italy with a population of around 3.5 million people. After 3 brutal civil wars in the 90s, more than 20,000 people were killed and a third of the population was displaced. The wars in Brazzaville were based on a power struggle between political leaders. They used militia groups, armed men from the streets without military experience to fight each other. It was very difficult for the ICRC to approach them.
To talk with military people already trained is much easier, and we know what to say, you know. But to talk with militias, it's much more difficult. And Brazzaville was a very good spot to contact the ex-civilians who combated here in the 90s.
Christian Pundi was a well-known commander of the Cobras. Since the end of the war in 1999, he runs a bar and lives here with his family. He also works for a UN-sponsored disarmament program, collecting ammunition and weapons to be destroyed.
This is how we destroy these weapons.
It must break your heart to see these guns all breaking up like this.
No, I'm very happy because it's not good if people keep that at home, especially civilians, because if you shoot this at a person, you explode.
For the interview, Christian leads Juan and Kazan to a former battlefield. Immediately, the memories return.
These are the cartridges we shot. Even 7 years after the end of the war, there are still many buried in the ground. We had atrocious encounters here. We've seen it all. We know what war means. It was barbaric. I've seen people cutting heads of wounded enemies, or cutting off arms.
In your view, what was missing?
These people were not properly trained, and they didn't have any education. The combatants grew like mushrooms. Kids, 14 or 15 years old, in a tense situation, it's explosive. We tried to recruit kids to build a resistance. Some people got one-day training. We just showed how to manipulate a gun, how to load and shoot. That was the end of the training.
Do you think strict discipline and sanctions for those who do not respect the laws of war could help fighters to behave differently?
Of course, it was simply barbaric, because people had no training. They didn't see the extent of their crimes because they were often drunk. They smoked and so on. I drank at least 2 bottles of whiskey a day. I was constantly drunk.
On the way home, Christian confesses further details of his traumatic war experiences and of his own actions that went beyond any law.
I bitterly regret because I had to cut off somebody's head. I tell you openly, I cut off somebody's head, but I was under the effect of alcohol. At that time I drank at least 2 bottles of alcohol and one of our friends got killed. the ninjas ripped off his heart. 2 days later, when we killed a ninja, I had to cut off his head and used it as a trophy on my car. I brought the head back in his neighborhood. Everybody saw me with the head of the ninja.
Like Christian, many others in the different militias in Congo, Brazzaville were exposed to extreme violence. Lieutenant Joachim was a commander of the Kokoi militia. He was one of their toughest fighters and primarily in frontline combat. His nickname, Kokoi, was used until 1997. Joachim was part of the government forces. He had heard about international humanitarian law during his initial military training. Later, during the mayhem of the Civil War, he learned to appreciate the important educational role of the ICRC.
First, I have to say the ICRC introduced education in international law to the armed forces. That's really good. Secondly, one really has to improve training with films we show, not only to the army. We have to expand this especially for politicians, since they are responsible for inciting hatred in the population. It's them. They need to be better educated. They need to be shown their responsibilities.
What would you advise other combatants to keep war within limits?
First, you need to be conscious of what you are doing yourself. If one day you encounter a woman who you have raped, you will not be at ease. And I have seen, now today, there are young fighters who were with me. They went mad. But I know they are affected because after the war, they found that even their own families would not accept them. They end up in communities where they had committed atrocities. Inevitably, their minds go mad. They can only calm down with drugs and alcohol.
Those who commit or take part in violations often become the victims of their own behavior, which can affect their mental well-being.
So, the message is to follow the so-called rules of the game.
Persons taking no active part in hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down their arms and those placed out of combat by sickness, wounds and detention, shall be treated humanely.
In a war, certain lines must not be crossed.
Laws of war prohibit murder, mutilation, torture, rape and other forms of sexual violence, hostage-taking, pillage, humiliating treatment and executions without fair trial. Laws of war also oblige each party to care for the wounded and sick.
The enemy on the other side is someone aiming at you, someone wanting to kill you. It's not a woman, a mother, who you are trying to rape. It's not a man who worked hard to build a house which you loot simply out of hatred. That's not good. For the rest of your life, you'll be miserable because these negative images will haunt you forever.